Hello, hello to all our friends, Jesuit alumni in the world who are watching us. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you all for a new Jesuit alumni conversation. Um, some of you may know that we had the first one last May with Father Bill Muller, who happens to be the spiritual counselor of the World Union of Jesuit Alumni. And we thought that this experiment was rather successful, and we decided to go on with that new formula of Jesuit alumni conversations. Now, the reason why we did that was because at the time we were in the middle of the pandemic, the coronavirus crisis. Now, guess what? 5 months later, we are still in the midst of this. We're not out of it. So there's a reason more to go on with these Jesuit alumni conversations because we think it's a great way to weave links and bonds between Jesuit alumni worldwide. So we decided to launch a new series of what we could call JACs, Jesuit Alumni Conversations. And the first one today is going to go about refugees and migrants. You will see later on in this live session that we have already planned two other sessions on discernment and on the education, but more about that later on. It is now my pleasure and privilege and honored to welcome for this live session, for this conversation, two people. As you know, the format is that we each time, for a dedicated topic, invite a Jesuit and a Jesuit alumnus or Jesuit alumni. So today we respect our own format, and we have with us, first of all, a Jesuit, Tom Smolich from the US, who is the international director of the Jesuit Refugee Service, but who before that was for 8 years the president of the Conference of US Provincials. So a rather important function. And in 2015, he took over the helm of the Jesuit Refugee Service. He will present himself a little bit more in a moment. But with us today, we have also a Jesuit alumni, and we are glad that we have a woman with us, Miren Mendiluce from the Basque country in Spain. And she doubled down on being an alumnus or an alumni because she is an alumni of both a Jesuit high school and a Jesuit university. So no one could do better than she does in that field, and she will present herself later on also in greater detail to us. Before I present a little bit the topic of today, I simply have to remind you all that this is being recorded and could be viewable later on. And also, please write down your questions on Facebook because we are able to read your questions and we will be delighted to answer some of them, as many as possible, later on during that session. So, maybe a very quick introduction on the topics of refugees and migrants. And let me simply give you a few numbers. Uh, Forcibly displaced people in the world in 2019, there were almost 80 million people in this world forcibly displaced, out of which 26 millions were refugees, because there are different categories, as you know, of different persons. So 26 were refugees. Um, they were mainly coming from Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and Myanmar, but uh, unfortunately also coming from many other countries in the world. 40% of them are children. So you see the catastrophe for that generation. And contrary to the perception we may have in some countries, especially if I may in Europe, well, the vast majority of these refugees are hosted in developing countries for 85% of them. And in 73% of these cases, they are hosted they are welcome, if I may use that expression, in neighboring countries. So not in Europe, because we are a little bit further away, and not in the US either, or in Australia or Japan or wherever. And from these neighboring countries, neighboring to the tragedies that create the displacement of people, Turkey is welcoming the most refugees with 3.6 million people. Colombia, almost 2 million people, essentially people from Venezuela, and Pakistan, 1.5 million. So this is a very contrasted situation, but it's a huge worldwide problem. And we thought that as part of that new series of Jesuit alumni conversation, we had to start with the question of refugees. So let me now leave the floor immediately to our guest of honor of today, Father Tom Smolich, International Director of the Jesuit Refugee Service, who has 7, 8, 9 minutes, not more than that, Father, to explain to us what you have to tell us. And then it's going to be Miren's turn, and then it's going to be the questions of the audience. Please.
Alain, thank you very much for the introduction, and I promise to be on time. Just a little bit of my own credentials. I too went to a Jesuit high school in Sacramento, California. I'm a graduate both at the bachelor's and master's degree level from Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, and have my master's in theology from the Jesuit School of Theology in Berkeley, now part of Santa Clara University. So I'm a double winner here, a Jesuit and a grad. And thanks to you all for being part of this conversation today. In the time I've got, let me just add a few important dimensions to the information that Alain just shared with us regarding the refugee situation. Talk a little bit about the impact of COVID on that situation, and then open it up to what JRS is doing and is trying to do. Miren will add her personal experience of the situation of refugees and her service with JRS. As Alain said, almost 80 million people around the world are forcibly displaced. The vast majority of them in the developing world, usually reasonably close to the countries that they have left. The largest number of forcibly displaced people stay in their own countries. About half of the displaced Syrians are actually still in Syria. Most Colombians who have fled war and drug issues remain in Colombia. The same with Afghanistan and other countries. What is also distinctive about this situation of refugees, as opposed to maybe 10, 20 years previously, is that the typical refugee spends much longer outside or in that sort of non-determined state than previously. We tend to think of refugees as maybe spending a few months, maybe a year away from home, and they go back. That is true in a natural disaster, but certainly not true for the typical refugee now. With resettlement having shut down in most of the world, even pre-COVID, most of the folks who are refugees will spend up to 20 years in this indeterminate state. If you are displaced for longer than 5 years, you will likely be displaced for 20 years or more. One of the phrases which is often thrown about is the refugee crisis. I tend to think of it not as a crisis. Even though we are talking about 80 million people, 80 million stories, that's less than 1% of all the humans who are on the earth. It is a crisis of management. It is a crisis of care. As Pope Francis says in the recent encyclical Fratelli Tutti, it is a crisis of global disengagement, a global not caring. I'm not saying that the solutions to the situation of 80 million forcibly displaced people is necessarily easy, but there are solutions, and working together, I think we can move towards them. What has COVID done to this situation? As I think we know, COVID is a worldwide phenomenon, but its impact and the way and the timing that it affects people varies from place to place, even country to country. Certainly the experience in the global north, Europe and North America, with large numbers of folks dying of the disease, is not necessarily being replicated in other parts of the world. Most of that is probably an age determinant more than anything else. What we are seeing, though, is that the COVID crisis has two dimensions for refugees or forcibly displaced people. One is the disease itself, and the other is the economic impact of the appropriate measures that countries have taken to forestall the spread of COVID. I think most of us would understand that most forcibly displaced people do not have stable jobs. Many of them are moving from job to job, itinerant workers, itinerant salespeople. Those are the folks who were the first to go, shall we say, in an economic shutdown. And so this phenomenon has really been hard on the forcibly displaced people that we serve, partially because of illness and partially because of just not having what it takes to support themselves and their families. I would say the good news on this, and this may be a bit of a contrast for those of us in Europe and North America, is that much of the global South is actually reopening. Perhaps the second wave hasn't come, but schools are reopening. Societies are reopening, again, having suffered less impact from the disease itself than from the economic slowdown. For instance, Thailand, even though things are a little rocky there today, Thailand has basically reopened its way of being with COVID precautions being taken. Education is back and going again in Chad. Many countries in Africa are in the process of reopening their schools as well. Afghanistan has just restarted its educational projects. So there is hope, but the impact has been severe. Which leads me to JRS and the mission that we have. We celebrate our 40th birthday, our 40th anniversary a month from today. Father Pedro Arrupe, then Superior General of the Society of Jesus, founded us in 1980 as a response to the Vietnamese boat crisis. Soon after that, the first Ethiopian refugees fleeing famine there started arriving in Europe. And Centro Estale, which is JRS Italy, started its work in the complex of the Jesuit Church here in Rome. JRS focus has always been a human, a pedagogical, and a spiritual one. We do our best to accompany people, to walk closely with them, to serve their educational needs. We are a pedagogical group. After all, we are part of the Society of Jesus. And to attend to the spiritual needs that all of our folks have. Our focus has always been and continues to be on those person-oriented services. In our current strategic framework, we have 4 pillars for our strategic priorities: reconciliation, psychosocial and mental health services, education and livelihoods training, and advocacy. These are very human-oriented services. We now offer them in 56 countries throughout the world. And last year we served over 800,000 people in our accompaniment, service, and defense of rights of all people. The effect for us of COVID has been significant. All of our country offices experienced some kind of a shutdown, some total, some close to total. All of our schools went into hibernation for at least a little while. We did keep the lights on. We stayed faithful to our mission. We developed alternative strategies to do education, to accompany people. In Dzaleka Camp, Malawi, for instance, we went to the radio to keep our high school students in touch with their learning process. In Syria and in Lebanon, our teachers used WhatsApp and then made periodic home visits individual to individual, to check on the progress of our students. We certainly extended, and still do in some areas, our emergency services of food and other items. But our focus has remained on the mission. And I'm glad to say and proud to say of how faithful the people in the field have been to that mission. So that's a little thumbnail sketch of the COVID situation and JRS's response to the world of refugees right now. Miren, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you for sharing. Thank you, Alain, also for this opportunity. Well, as Alain presented myself, I'm Miren Mendiluce, and I'm working now for JRS International Office in the Finance Department. And I would like to share with you how I arrived here. And I think that to explain to you how I'm here now in 2020, we have to go many years ago, no? When I probably started with my basic school and my high school at Jesuit University, at Jesuit school, sorry, in San Sebastian. It's a small town in the north of Spain. And well, my parents decided that that was a good school for me to learn about not only mathematics, biology, and different stuff, but also to be a good person, to learn about different values, to have also the influence of the Jesuit school. And so they decided to take me to the Jesuit school. And I think that everything started there. There's an important sentence or an important message that I saw every day during my school time, that was enter to learn and exit or leave to serve. So it's something that now, some years after leaving the school, it's something that I remember a lot. And it's true that when you are 15 to 18 years old, the most important thing for you ever is choosing your degree. It seems that it's the end of your life. So I remember that when I was trying to decide which degree I study, I was thinking, okay, I want to study something related to the medicine. So this way I can help people. Or I can study sociology. So this way I can understand people to try to help them. Because I wanted to live to serve, no? So at the end, I don't know why, I decided to study business and law, a double degree in Deusto University in San Sebastian as well. And my university time, I have to say that it was I had a special relationship with the election of my degree. During all my high school and university, most of my free time, I spent most of the free time that I have volunteering in different activities. First of all, in my city, with people with mental disabilities or with homeless people, with different collectives. But during university, that I was a little bit older, I had the opportunity also to volunteering abroad. So I went from the first time to Tanzania, and then I discovered another reality. It was a very interesting experience for me. And coming back to San Sebastian, I remember that was quite painful, because I discovered that my degree wasn't useful for helping people. So what I want to do, I decided to change the degree. Then I decided to continue. And it was with different experiences, like, for example, an experience in Sicily or in Colombia, where I discovered that the degree was a mean, no? That I could help others with different background. So I said, okay, how can I serve to the others being an economist or being a lawyer, or what can I do with my skills, with my knowledge, with my training? So it was the moment of finishing the university and the election of my career path. And I always talk about a metaphor that I really like. It's like at the moment I was seeing my life as a wardrobe, no, a wardrobe with different drawers. So I had the drawer of the studies, I have the drawer of friends, I had the drawer of free time, and in the drawer of free time there was volunteering and helping others or serving others. And I didn't want that this drawer of free time was, or volunteering or serving others, was only a draw. I wanted to be something holistic, not something holistic in my life. So I decided, okay, my career path has to be aligned with this this mission and this vocation of serving others. So as my first job experience, I worked inside the Caritas homeless department in San Sebastian as well. And it was a really good experience. And I think that it helped me a lot to know how to deal with different people, with different culture, different situations. And it was a confirmation about which path I wanted to take or to follow in my life. So with my couple, we started deciding what to do with our lives, and we went through a discerning process, what we wanted to do. And we were linked to the Entre Culturas and Alboan, which are two NGOs, Jesuit NGOs in Spain, and they offered us to prepare Volpa process, which is a volunteering program, and we said, okay, why not? So after a year of preparation, we finally went for 2 years to work in Burundi and Tanzania with JRS. We were not just looking for a personal experience, but we were also looking for a professional experience, because for us it wasn't a break of 2 years that we wanted to have a special experience or a different experience, but we wanted to live those years as an example of what we wanted to do in our lives, no? So as I had this background in finance, administration, and even in law, I was offered to be part of the finance team as country finance officer in Burundi. And who is my husband now, Pablo, he was offered to be programs officer in the country office in Burundi and Tanzania. So we had many expectations. You can imagine when you change your life, or when you give a big step, you think many things. No, since from our sofa in Spain, we were thinking how it's going to be, and we have to say, or I have to say, that expectations and reality were not the same thing at all. We were expecting arriving to a country. We both had been in Africa before, so we knew something, but the fact is that we didn't know anything. So we wanted to arrive to a place and to build a community and being part of the culture. And well, we did it in our way. It wasn't as idyllic as we thought or as expected. And we went through an adaptation process. And nowadays, if I have to talk about that time, I don't talk, or I don't think, or I don't feel about that time as an experience in my life, but as a lifetime. No, 2 years of my life were that way. And of course, a very important part of that experience, or of that period of my life, was the job that I was doing, because it was what I was looking for. I was looking for having a job where I shared totally the mission, where I was serving others, especially refugees or asylum seekers. And well, I found that place. So let me explain you a little bit how it works, the humanitarian context or the humanitarian structure inside a refugee camp. Inside different, well, or at least it's the experience that I know from the refugee camps in Burundi and in Tanzania. Maybe it's different in other countries. But the thing is that inside refugee camps, there are some organizations that give services to refugees. So we have organizations that are giving health services, or logistic services, food providers, and education providers, for example. So we were working more in the education part, and we were when I say we, I'm talking about JRS. JRS was the implementing partner for the education in the refugee camps of Burundi. So we had many teachers working with us to teach more than 50,000 students. So it was a big number of people that we were trying to serve, and serving as best as we can. So what I was doing there, as I said before, I was the finance officer in the country office of WUJA in the city of Burundi. And there I was managing the finances of the organization, because at the end, as in all organizations, you need to have a structure, administration, because at the end you are managing quite a big amount of money, and everything is very professionalism. No, you need to deal with donors, you need to report, you need to have the situation very clear. So I was more in this part of the work. I wasn't directly working in my daily life with refugees or inside the camps teaching, but it was very good going to refugee camps every 3, 4, 5 weeks, and being there with these people, being there with the staff that were working inside the refugee camps, and also was good to be with the refugees directly, because it was a way to transmit them that we were together, that we were supporting them, that we were trying our best to improve their lives. So in that sense, I understood that, linking with what I was saying before of what I'm going to do with my economy background. How can I serve? Well, we need all the profiles, we need all the skills to be ready to serve refugees, displaced people, migrants, and different people, because at the end we need to give a holistic response to them. So after 2 years in Burundi and Tanzania, we decided that it was our time to come back to Europe, to come back to be closer to our families, to our culture. And I was lucky because I had an opportunity to come back to the international officing role. And here I'm working as finance officer to support also some countries in Africa, especially in Great Lakes region. So I keep contact with my old colleagues, with my former colleagues, and also supporting West African regions and Middle East. So it's a way to keep doing for refugees. And I would like to finish with an idea that I really like, that once someone asked me, do you want to be loved forever, or do you want to be loved every day? So it's a question that I do to myself very often, where I say to myself that I don't want to work for refugees forever, but I want to decide to work for refugees every day. So it's a way to understand my job here and my experience in Burundi. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Miren. I really like your last phrase. I don't want to work for refugees forever, but for refugees every day. That sounds almost philosophical, but I think it's food for thought for us all. So thank you for this very personal journey and experience you share with us, which brings us a little bit away from the dry figures of how many million refugees and the situation in terms of geographies. So really thank you for that very personal account. Um, we'll come back to you with several questions later on, but maybe now, since uh, Tom Smolich himself alluded to the COVID crisis, I wanted maybe to launch the question, the Q&A session, by asking him maybe a few questions regarding the sanitary crisis. Um, where we have read that in some countries the COVID-19 crisis as such triggered migrations, albeit internal migrations. Is that so? And do you have examples?
So thanks for that. Thanks for that question. I suspect there are, how would I want to put this? There are certainly situations where I would say more likely the economic, social crisis that the COVID lockdown brought forced people to leave home in search of safety, in search of security. I am not aware of people who said, COVID is coming, I am leaving. Certainly, it has complicated people's abilities to survive and thrive. So an example, which may be something like you are talking about, Alain, is, for instance, a number of Venezuelans chose to return home to Venezuela from Colombia because with the economic lockdown there, because COVID has been quite bad in the northern part of Latin America, they felt that they had better chances for food, for being taken care of going back home. We've heard that this is a large number. Actually, I was talking to our regional director. We're talking about less than 100,000 of a 2 million plus population. And the estimate is that once the COVID situation stabilizes, there'll be more people even going back to Colombia and probably more people leaving. What I would say is that in situations where people's lives became more vulnerable, they may have moved on. Whether that was back home or whether it was back to a third place really varied from place to place. But I don't think COVID itself was a particular driver of more forced migration.
In the same vein, maybe a question on let's say the well-known migration of, from some countries to Europe. Did the COVID-19 crisis actually slow down the migration towards Europe over the Mediterranean, or not at all, or were these distinct phenomena?
I think it's an interesting question. I think, honestly, it's too soon to tell. I think we have a lot of anecdotal evidence that when the crisis first hit and when the lockdowns really sunk in here in Europe, March, April, May, the whole mechanism, and I'm using mechanism kind of pleasantly because, as we know, there's a lot of criminal activity associated with this. The whole mechanism temporarily froze. I think some people, again, the anecdotal evidence would say that some people said it's not time to go to Europe right now because of COVID. I think there was also the fact that the sort of informal networks froze here in Europe in terms of moving people on. As we know, this is a lucrative enterprise for many people, unfortunately. And I think the mechanism figured out a way to keep going. Earlier today, I attended a seminar on trafficking, human trafficking at the International Union of Superiors General. And this was the sort of general sense, and trafficking is very closely associated with some of the migration flows. There was initially kind of a freeze, nobody knowing what to do, but people figure out how to keep it going. And certainly the exploitation of people has arguably risen, and the human trafficking, especially of vulnerable migrants, especially of vulnerable women, if anything, has actually picked up.
Now, Tom, but also Miren, very concretely, not all refugees are in camps. We know that, but some are, and quite a few. So in those camps, COVID-19 could also spread. So what is your experience? And I know, Miren, you're back from Burundi at a time where COVID-19 did not exist, but feel free to intervene. How do you and other organizations taking care of refugees, how do you take care of the danger of seeing COVID-19 spread in camps?
Miren, if you want to answer that first, and I can pick up, or I can answer and you can go, whatever.
Well, I think that, of course, the situations that refugees are living inside the camps in terms of health, in terms of sanitation, in terms of different basic things that are the hygiene, that are very important in terms of spreading the virus, were very, very basic inside the camp. So it was a risk. And for me, the biggest risk, it wasn't that one. That was a big risk, of course, but that to avoid the spread of the virus inside the camps, many of the help that refugees received inside the camps were stopped. So there were other risks or other aggressions inside the camp. For example, the schools are not only a place to study, but though schools are places where children are safe, or for example, girls are safe. So with this kind of measures against the COVID, yes, you are protecting people for not having the COVID, but there are other risks that maybe some children are being exposed to some aggressions or to other difficult situations. And in terms of the virus, well, as Tom will give a better explanation now, but I think that the conditions are very basic or are under the minimum of dignity in many of the places. So it's they are always in the last point, no? So, well, Tom, thank you for helping me with this answer, because I'm sure that you have many other inputs coming from different countries and different refugee camps. So I'm sure that you are going to give us a complete answer to the question.
Miren, I think you've captured a really key piece of this, that because of COVID and the shutdown, many of the people that we work with, especially women and children, are more vulnerable. This is an economic issue. This is a protection issue. In terms of the disease itself, Alain, I think that's what your question was. Refugee camps, from what we have seen, refugee camps are no more vulnerable than the local communities that they are part of. So in terms of most camps, we haven't seen anything out of the ordinary, or pardon me, we haven't seen anything significantly different in a refugee camp from the population in the country, from the population in the area surrounding it. Why is that? I think there's a combination of things, but what I would say is that even as Miren said, the standards may be rudimentary and may not be up to par. In most camps, there is a health system. Maybe it's basic, but there is a health system. There are NGOs who are doing training and community sensitization on this risk. So I think in some ways, the situation of a refugee in a camp might be better than someone who is displaced and living in an urban slum. There are potentially more resources for that person. I would also say that COVID is a unique kind of risk in the sense that we, as the people doing our service and accompaniment, can be perpetrators of the risk if we are not careful. So it's really important for us to use PPEs, to use the protection, to not just talk about the appropriate practices, but to also use them, to do our own sense of testing, and in a sense to follow all the protocols that we have set out. That is something that we've been really trying to do, and I think we have succeeded well. Alain, I would say in general, where I think COVID has been most problematic are in areas where the social fabric was pretty torn to begin with. Syria is a mess. We don't know that technically, but it is. COVID is literally all over the place. Venezuela, again, in countries where there are pre-existing problems, it's in a sense running rampant. The one place we honestly don't know too much about is Bangladesh. The camps for the Rohingyas have been pretty much isolated from the rest of the community. The international community is just now being allowed to return. I'm not sure how accurate the information is that we have coming from Bangladesh and even Myanmar, but I think a lot of it has to do with the government which is in place.
Yeah, as very often.
And that might even be true in the developed world as well, but I'm not going to make that comment. So,
everybody will have understood what he wants to understand from that comment.
Absolutely.
Tom, you alluded earlier on, and this may be one of the questions we received from the audience. You alluded to the schools in the refugee camps, because of course they are essential. So they closed down for a while, and then they reopened. Is that the current situation?
I'd say they are reopening. They are reopening according to the local government standards. So for instance, in Kenya, I think it's tomorrow actually, the schools will begin their reopening process, beginning with the grades which are scheduled to take a national exam. So so again, different countries are doing different things in terms of that reopening process. For instance, Chad, where we have a large presence with the Darfurian refugees in Eastern Chad, schools have been reopened for over a month now. I think it was, if I want to remember, late August when schools actually reopened there. Again, social distancing, hygiene in place, but the schools, in a sense, said the dangerous period has passed. It's time to get kids back in school. And JRS would say, both from an educational and a protection perspective, getting kids back into school is very important.
Thank you, Tom. We got another question from the audience, and which is a little bit, making the link between the Jesuit world and the Jesuit alumni world and the Jesuit education system and the refugees. And I'm sure you'll like that. And so this person simply says, how do you think Jesuit higher education institutions could support the work being undertaken by the Jesuit Refugee Service? That must be at the very core of your preoccupation, I'm sure.
So I will respond in two ways to that. One is that we are blessed. JRS is blessed with a number of links to Jesuit higher education throughout the world, both on the global level and on the more local level. Miren talked about her experience as a student of Deusto, being connected with Integral Tours Alboan in Spain and the volunteer program that they have been working on. So that's certainly one way where that has been going on for many years. I would say the ties are there. Our experience with COVID is that it is speeding up the process of change. We are doing things, for instance, on Zoom and Teams and on this platform that we would never thought of doing a year ago. So I would say, how is this working with universities? People have been very generous in terms of time, talent, and treasure. Schools are working with us in terms of our core mission of education. We have particular partnerships which do training, both of our folks and some of the folks that we work with in the field. We would certainly continue to welcome any and all of those. Any of you from Jesuit universities who want to get in touch with us, you can find either Miren or me or someone from JRS in your local area.
Tom will come back later on that. So from what you say, I take that the case, the example of Miren is by far not unique. And there are other people coming from other Jesuit institutions who have joined your ranks or other organizations, for that matter, taking care of refugees and migrants, and that many more could do. Now, I have a tricky question for you. If we have dozens and dozens of Miren Mendiluce knocking on your door to be sent in refugee camps or wherever, or volunteering to become a finance director, JRS we would have to grow tremendously to accommodate them all.
No. We always need good people. There is always room for somebody who believes in our mission. As Miren can tell you, there are opportunities, there are openings, there are possibilities to help out in local situations in many different ways. What I would say is, and I think Miren's experience would show this, just because somebody volunteers today doesn't mean that in 2 weeks they wind up in Burundi. I think Miren mentioned that it was close to a year before you actually went there. So it's a process of matching. It's a process of making things work well. And yes, if 1,000 people showed up today, it would be a little challenging. But if 5 of you out there want to say, I want to be part of JRS in the next couple of months, the door is open. Miren?
The message is very, very clear. Tom, I know you may have to run in a few minutes, and we'll go on with Miren.
I've got about 5 more minutes, Alain. So okay.
Okay, and so let's take advantage of these last 5 minutes with you. The Pope Francis just wrote and published, I think, again, a great text, the encyclic Fratelli Tutti. He speaks in there about a rather strange concept. It's social friendship, he calls it, if that is the right translation into English. Amitié sociale, we say in French. What does he mean by that, and how does that relate to your work at JRS with refugees?
So that is the word which is used in the English translation, social friendship. I'm going to be very honest with you. I've given the encyclical a general read. I haven't dived down into that in particular. But what I think what I can say would be 2 things. One is that throughout the encyclical, he is trying to draw a contrast between, shall we say, the isolation, the indifference, the disengagement or disenchantment of the kind of globalization that he sees as, in a sense, having sort of running things right now. I think the way that I would look at it, and again, I want to go back and read it more carefully. What he's talking about is these friendships, these connections create the world that we want to have. These connections, the world, the kingdom of God is not created online. It is not created in sort of global, it is not created in the cloud, to use a current image, but it's created by people making connections with one another. He also, talks considerably about solidarity. He also talks about, in the sort of dominant image that he uses, that is chapter 2 of that encyclical, the parable of the Good Samaritan. I would suggest that we, keep the image of social friendship as sort of an interpretation, or maybe an expression of what he sees as important in the parable of the Good Samaritan, that we are really called to be neighbor for one another. And he's proposing social friendship as a model, dare I say, an alternative to what is often considered social or social media or social interaction in the world today. But don't take my word for it. Read the encyclical and talk to somebody who knows more about it than I. You've been muted.
Thank you. And I think that this could be a great topic for a Jesuit alumni conversation, focusing only on Fratelli Tutti as a great text, and really one that puts us a little bit off balance with rather new concepts, but concept that could make history. And I think this one could well be the case. We have another question, and again,
sure.
if you have to run, Tom,
I will stay for one more.
Okay, and then the last ones will be for Miren.
Absolutely.
We have a question about technology, because these Jesuit alumni conversations were born out of a crisis, that made us, switch over to the digital world. Okay,
Yeah.
and this conversation takes place online. So someone tells us the question: can we take advantage of new technologies for online education? But I suppose the underlying question is in in refugee camps and with refugees, because we know that this is taking place in normal education. But so how do you, and Jesuit Worldwide Learning, created by your predecessor, Peter Balles, a German Jesuit, is already going in that direction. But what are your thoughts about that?
So thank you for this question. And it's a great thing that I can end on, and then Miren can pick it up in terms of her experience in Burundi and Tanzania. I would say two things in terms of the education. I think the first round of studies about online education in the time of COVID would generally say that, especially for younger children, probably secondary school children, online education is not as successful as in-person education. I think we have to acknowledge that there are issues with access to technology, especially for the poorer parts of the world, the pedagogical issues. We would also say protection is also more complicated. One of the things about being in school is that it keeps people safe, it keeps kids safe. So I think in terms of seeing technology or sort of online education as a substitute for education in camps, or even education in areas where there are a number of forcibly displaced people, I don't think that's quite the way to go. Can technology make a difference in their education? Unquestionably. We have several pilot programs going on in terms of, can tablets make a difference? What sort of, training teachers can be done online? And improving the quality of teaching it's that indirect effect of what technology can do. I would also add that one of the particular challenges where we work in the States, we refer to as the last mile, getting the internet access, getting the bandwidth to where the people are, is typically a significant challenge. Most of the people that we serve do not have the kind of bandwidth that you would need to do sort of an educational platform strictly online. That said, I think there are many more possibilities once one moves further up into education. JWL, Jesuit Worldwide Learning's platform of higher education, bachelor's level education, can work very well there, especially in a mixed platform. Most of the work that we do post-secondary is in that blended learning model. And the one thing I would especially say is that participation of refugees in the online world of work is a crucial part of the solution for inclusion. One of our most exciting projects is called Pathfinder. We have pilots of this going right now in Malawi and in Kenya, where building with a French NGO called Connexio, we are doing training for online gig work, translations in interpreting, graphic designs, etc., training refugees to do this. Our first results on this are quite successful. Where the online capacity is there and allows refugees to participate in the world wherever they are. This is the cutting edge in terms of inclusion. And I think the tech world, the online participation, will be a huge benefit if we can get it right for the inclusion and participation of the refugee communities. With that, I really need to leave. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Miren. Folks in the audience there, thank you for being part of this. Alain and crew, thank you for WUJA's sponsorship of this event. And as we say in Italy, ci vediamo, and God bless.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for being with us, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Take care now.
Miren, we go on with you. related to that last question on education in the camps and maybe the online part of it,
Mhm.
do you have some first-hand experience to share with us?
I I can talk about two very different experiences. The first time that I went into a refugee camp, I found that they were studying informatics with the blackboard. So they didn't have access to computers. So they were having different paintings in the blackboard with different parts of the computer. So I thought, wow, how these people can go after to the professional world or to find a job or to university or wherever and use a real computer because it's very different. So that was an experience that it wasn't very positive. No, Tom was saying that in most of the places where we are working, the access to the band that we need or to electricity or are complicated. But I would like also to share with you a positive experience. For example, in Chad, we have a project with a donor who is giving, well, we have in Chad, but we have in other countries as well. It's different. It's a project where a donor is providing us some computers with that are connected to the satellite connection directly. So in a refugee camp where we don't have internet connection, it's possible to use computers and to learn about IT and develop IT skills, which is wonderful. So, well, I think that we are all aware about the importance of this kind of skills in our lives. Especially, I would like to highlight the last point that Tom mentioned about being part of the decisions of the world, being participating in the decision making, thanks to the technology. And I think that we are moving little by little forward to reach that point.
Miren, another question for you. Um, if you were to say, because you are finance director of JRS,
No,
International
no, finance officer.
finance officer, okay. Well, still, you are in the finance department. So,
Yes.
if I were to oversimplify and ask you whether JRS needs more money or more voluntary work, what would you say? Of course, you are going to answer to me both, I suppose. But is money important for JRS beside voluntary work?
I think both are important, as you were saying. Um, Talking about money, um, we are implementing activities because we have money. No, all the actions that we do in the refugee camps are because we have money. No, we need to pay teachers, we need to pay salaries, we need to pay materials, uniforms, sometimes food. We need to pay exam fees because if we want to get the diplomas for children, for example, we need to pay the taxes. So money it's very important because so yes, and also volunteering, of course it's I can't say how much people do we have now volunteering inside, but it's a big number of people, no. And they are really important because they give us support in finance, in programs, in HR, in different departments all around the world. But the main part of our workers or our incentive workers are refugees themselves that are giving, for example, they are working as teachers for their children. So we need to pay them. We need to, it's also a way to activate the economy inside the refugee camp. So we need both. We need human resources, and inside human resources, we need professional staff and we need volunteers, and we need money to maintain this structure and to maintain all the activities that we are doing in the field.
Miren, you should be in the marketing department because you are doing your pitch excellently. I have to say, now we understand we need to donate and offer our time and our initiative, efforts, and creativity. So, if you were to say one or two more things Jesuit alumni could do, liaising with JRS? What would that be? Becoming a volunteer, that's clear. Donate. What else?
I think that the most important thing is to be aware that this kind of reality exists outside of our small bubble, no, outside of us, our small world. So be aware of it. So when we are aware of it, we take decisions taking that into consideration. And I think that that's the most important thing we can do, because at the end, the life of refugees will improve if, as society, we can improve in our decision making. If we think in a particular way about politics, for example, no, if we all know, if our society or if all the alumni people are aware of this situation, probably they would ask for a certain regulation in their countries, or they would spend their money in a certain mode, or they would donate, of course. So I think that we have to go out from our not easy life, but from our small bubble, and to look what's abroad, what are other people suffering or living or enjoying even, no? So we can have a more conscious mind about the different realities.
So the capacity of doing advocacy is dependent on the fact of being aware of what's going on. Without awareness, you can't do any advocacy and try to change things at the level of regulations in each other's country. So it's very clear, and thank you for that message. Maybe a last question for you before we go over to our next sessions, our two next Jesuit alumni conversations. A more personal question for you, Miren. Um, in your during your experience in let's say Burundi, what struck you the most? What is your most vivid memory? What is the thing you would keep with you for the rest of your life?
It's not an easy question. I will try to answer. Um, I think that now, well, maybe before going to Burundi, I thought as refugees as a reality or as a global reality. But now I can see faces, stories, and names behind the refugee world. No, so and it could be me. I mean, I born in San Sebastian, but I could had born in a small village in Congo, and being a refugee. So I think that the the most clear thing that I keep from my experience there is that um, that is behind the refugee world, we have many stories that are not very different to ours, that they are looking for the same, or they have the same objectives in life than we have. So we we have to support each other. I mean, it's not because we are different that we are in different situations. It could be me, or maybe in the future it can be me. No? So
Thank you, Miren, for that testimony. Please stay with us for 2 more minutes. We are going to address the next two sessions we will have in these Jesuit alumni conversations. So we will try to have a rhythm of one conversation a month.
mhm.
So we have a first series in October, November, December, and then we'll have other ones as of January of next year, especially because we have good reasons to think that we are not out of the pandemic anytime soon. So the next session will be in November about discernment. We will welcome Father John Dardis, who is Counselor of Father General for Apostolic Planning and Discernment. And that will be also, he will be accompanied by Chris Miller. Chris Miller being a Jesuit alumnus from the US, who specializes in organizing retreats of all kinds. So we will have again a high-ranking Jesuit and a Jesuit alumnus giving his first-hand experience. Now, you can see the dates and hours, being visible on the screen in a ticker mode, like on CNN. But this is about our next session, and then the last one for this year will be in December. That's going to be on the 9th of December, and we will welcome there Jose Mesa, who is the international secretary for pre-secondary and secondary education worldwide, so hundreds of Jesuit schools in the world. And he will be accompanied by a Jesuit alumnus from India, but whose name still has to be confirmed. And again, we will discuss on the situation of Jesuit education worldwide, but also in the light of the COVID-19 crisis, as it will be with John Dardy's Chris Miller about discernment. This crisis is so profound that it affects our lives, but also the apostolates and works of the Society of Jesus. I'd like to thank you, Miren, for your presence. Thanks again, Tom Smolich, for being with us. I'd like to say a big thank you to the man who operated this live session. You don't see him, but he is from Belgium, as I am, Maurice Selvet. I'd like to give you a rendezvous for the two next sessions and tell you that this has been recorded. And so if you want to share that Jesuit alumni conversation with people interested in refugees and migrants, you are, of course, welcome to do so. Thank you. Bye-bye to all of you. Thank you, Miren. Thank you, Tom. And let's see each other on the 14th of November for another Jesuit alumni conversation. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.